have some family in town, social distanced. It's our bubble. We got a bubble. It's an interesting thing, the whole bubble phenomena, because you don't really know. I mean, you know, right? But you don't fully know. So you trust the bubble, but at the same time, there's a little bit of ambiguity there, which you just kind of have to deal with. So that's been this weekend. It's been great. It's a great weekend. Slept really well last night. I'm finding new little routines. Like I used to write in a journal in bed before going to bed, but now I've got my journal on my desk. So on my way up to bed, I'll stop at my journal on my desk, write at my desk, then get into bed, read a little bit, then fall asleep. So just making little adjustments there. But anyway, that's what's going on my end. Let's look at the 11th stanza, and we'll get into the practice. So when you listen to this stuff, okay, think about getting to a place to hear it. So an open-minded place, and a place that kind of emphasizes curiosity over judgment. Just emphasize curiosity over judgment, and just let how the stanza comes out, just let it come out. We'll address it more deeply after we practice, but just let it kind of sit in your thoughts, and just be curious, and see if you can see any patterns as best you can, right? So consider the ebb and flow of the tide. When waves come to strike the shore, they crest and fall, creating a sound. Your breath should follow the same pattern, absorbing the entire universe with your belly with each inhalation. Know that we all have access to 4 treasures: the energy of the sun, the energy of the moon, the breath of heaven, the breath of earth, and the ebb and flow of the tide. So the 4 treasures are the energy of the sun and moon, so that's 1 treasure. The breath of heaven, which is think of the breath of the ideal, right? The breath of earth, which is kind of human experience. That has an element of the breath of suffering. So like heaven is this ideal, and the opposite of that is suffering. But when seen from this perspective, they complement each other. It's not one's better than the other. And the ebb and flow of the tides, which I'll talk about this in the interpretation, but the ebb and flow of the tides is that change is built in. That's the poetry of the stanza. All right, so let's practice. I'll show you kind of how I start to get ready for training. I'll take my leg and just bring it in like that. See? And I'll take my other leg and kind of put it on top. And the goal I'm trying to create is here. This region here is not up like that. It's a lot of space here. That's what you're looking for when you set up in your seat. Okay. So let's go into first bell. Just listen. Listen for the sound to disappear. Once the sound disappears, you can either shift right into the assessment of your sight picture, whatever's around you, Or you can close your eyes and assess through sound. Strategic. You are strategically assessing the situation around you. With sound, it's where is sound around me right now? And give it a location, front right, back rear. Look for patterns. So I got sound coming from my front right, but behind me is all quiet. Hardly any bird sounds. There's some, but they're far away. Now I'll assess my temperature, my body temperature. And the strategic aspect of this is what you're already familiar with. Situational awareness, just understanding if it's too hot or it's too cold, you're going to have to make adjustments, etc., etc. But what I want to emphasize here is the act of being strategic itself, which is a focused attention. That's the thing that we're practicing. And you may say to yourself, well, Ben, we do the same stuff every day. And that's the point. The point is to see the same kind of thing, not from the perspective of the same kind of thing, but the focus. The focus. It's the piece before what we're focusing on. It's the act of focusing itself that we're after. And so these little things, right? Your sight, picture, and sound, focusing on them, looking for patterns, focusing on the temperature, and then we get more subtle, because what's focused on is never it's never the same. It's the same gear we're using, your sight, your eyes, your ears, your skin, your nose, your mouth, but it's never the same. Remember last week, you can never step in the same body twice. Every day it's a little bit different. And what your job is establishing a relationship to focus that becomes more and more tuned in to all those differences. And so the goal is the focus itself. The familiarity of the pattern is meant to settle your central nervous system. Your central nervous system becomes settled because we're working together over and over and over again. So when you sit down with me, hopefully, there's a sense of familiarity, a sense of certainty, a sense of reliability. All those things facilitate a calm central nervous system, and because it's the morning and the day hasn't really started yet, that calm central nervous system facilitates greater illumination from awareness. So awareness itself becomes more recognized for its full effect. Now what's tough is when you go out into life and life is pulling you this way and that, awareness can get overwhelmed with everything else. And so the goal over time is to become so adept at, focusing your awareness that when a big moment hits, you're not so jarred by that moment that you forget that you have awareness to apply to it. And that's really what this stanza is all about. It's about no matter what's going on, you have an aspect of awareness that's always accessible to you. And so by becoming familiar with all that's going on, you'll be less likely to be triggered or thrown off the best version of yourself. So let's move into second bell. So second bell is all about shifting your awareness from kind of the experience of the senses outside to the experience of the body inside. So we went from outside to inside. So now you're just kind of studying the alignment and sensational qualities of the body itself. And so you start by connecting to the ground beneath you. And so if you're driving, for example, and of course you'd have your eyes open, but if you're driving, you would actually notice your ground as everything that's touching something, to include your hands. So your hands would actually be part of your ground. Because how you're touching the steering wheel, is part of your connection to the thing that's underneath you or the thing that's around you. And so that would make the ground also your hands, also your feet, also the backs of your legs, and also where the seat is hitting your back. So that's ground. Pelvis, nothing changes here. If you were driving and you were studying your pelvis, you can pay absolute attention to driving and studying your pelvis. And so for the rest of you that are seated and studying your pelvis is that space that holds so much. And you interact with your pelvis every day, multiple times a day. And so there's a lot going on down there that you largely don't pay attention to unless there's some kind of elimination stimulus or excitation stimulus, that region, right? So to become adept at paying attention to your pelvis in a kind of quiet form is essentially what a farmer does when it lays the groundwork for planting seeds. You establish the soil so that the seeds can grow in the soil once the seeds hit the soil. But you got to establish the ground first. And so that's what you're doing every time you're in a seated posture and you're assessing the sensation at your core or at your pelvis. That's what you're doing. You're establishing this framework, this groundwork for all the growth and information that can come out of there. Same as you come to your core. Your core is your powerhouse. And so we'll breathe into the core when we get to the breathing element. But your core is where everything kind of comes together and can be organized in almost any direction. And you can move from your core, through your core, with your core. And in the actual practice of Aikido, well, not just Aikido, in the practice of any kind of effective human movement, your core is really what drives everything, because it becomes a center of gravity and everything revolves around it. It's like a whip. And if you connect it correctly, it's unbelievably powerful without having to give a whole bunch of effort. It becomes fluid. Heart space. When you get to your heart space, you're starting to pay closer attention to the length of your spine between the spaces of your heart and your pelvis. So because you have solid ground, you can build the alignment of your spine. Without solid ground, you can't. If it's unstable, you can't really build your spine. You mostly just have to adapt. But if it is stable, you can build the length of your spine. And so you're putting time and energy and practice into the building of your spine. And what happens when you build your spine is other things can be let go. So if your spine is nice and comfortably aligned, you can check into your shoulder blades. What are they doing? They may have snuck up your back, and that may not be what you want them to do. Collarbones. Where are your collarbones? Is your chest kind of sinking, or is your chest upright? And again, the reason why you care is because if you're sunk in, the chances that your breath will be at its fullest capacity goes down. And when you're interacting with your breath, you want your breath to be as open and smooth as possible, because the more open and smooth and happy your breath, the more happy your body, and the more happy your experience is, because your breathing is talking to all of your organs are talking to your breath. All those are talking to your brain, and your brain is understanding your internal environment based on your external environment and establishing whether you're parasympathetic or sympathetically leaning. And that has an impact on every other system. So these little moments are all massive when they're seen in conjunction with everything else that's going on. And again, your attention to these things has the power to either cultivate them, change them, or let them deteriorate. It's really important to understand your relationships to this stuff. This isn't the stuff that just happens willy-nilly. It happens, and you either have a choice or you don't realize you have a choice. You either have a choice or you're ignorant to the fact that you have a choice. And so once you start to realize that you have a choice, that's where the practice is. Because having choice is awareness itself. Knowing how to use the awareness, that's the practice. So we get to throat space, we get to the top of the head, which is top of spine. And so you're just looking for length in the spine, comfortable length, no holding anywhere. And the head is essentially resting on top of your spine, free to kind of do whatever. All right, let's go to the third bell. So just notice your breath as it is. Now, what part of your body is moving when you breathe? Is it your chest region or is it your belly region that's moving when you breathe? So whatever it's doing, flip it. So if you're breathing belly, breathe chest. If you're breathing chest, try to breathe belly. You notice any kind of movement anywhere, or any kind of shifting of bones maybe, or just anything. Just notice what's there to be felt as you breathe. Not so much the breath itself, but the space that the breath holds. Now shift your pelvis around a little bit. Just kind of make some adjustments and see if any adjustments impact what it feels like to breathe. Now try a speed change. Instead of breathing in quickly, try breathing in really slowly. Same with breathing out, just slow it way down. Now notice what happens at the edges. So if you're breathing slow and you get to the top where you're almost full of air, notice what happens if you try to keep breathing in. Notice the resistance. Notice the resistance. Now when you breathe out really slow, real slow, try to notice how it just kind of disappears. The breath just ends in like nothingness. There's just like nothing else there. It's empty. One is really full and resistant. The other is just like an empty well with no bottom. Just kind of like, just everything just falls out. So just notice that. Notice that super slow exhale and notice what happens. So let's take about 2 minutes to just sit with this. just the up and down of the breath, the top edge, the resistance to more breath, the bottom emptiness. Where the breath goes in the body, chest region, belly region. Just study that for about a minute. All right, so the interpretation of the 11th stanza is as follows. Notice how the inhale expands the body. Notice how the exhale condenses the body. Notice there are limits, how there are limits at each end, places that you can't pass, places that you must surrender to and change direction. So I titled this stanza in the kind of stream title as change invites both lightness and darkness to all holidays and birthdays, to all birthdays and holiday parties. And my attempt at the title is just to articulate the fact that change is indifferent to the kinds of change. And consequently, as practitioners, we have to become adept at the changes that are especially challenging to become comfortable with. And becoming comfortable with change, even change that by its very nature is uncomfortable, is what the practice is kind of really geared to do over time. And so when we are going through the same pattern, the same 4-bell pattern, what we're doing is we're establishing a kind of a central established core that can be relied upon regardless of what change brings you that day. And this is particularly helpful in the context of kind of doubt, worry, fear, anxiety. Largely because doubt, worry, fear, and anxiety are kind of different variations of the same phenomena. And that's what he's saying in the context of the ebb and flow of the tide. the energy of the sun and the moon, the breath of heaven, the breath of earth. What he's saying is that there's essentially this spectrum, and the spectrum holds everything that can be experienced, and that the experience itself, as a good or bad, is kind of whatever. But what really matters is your ability to stay present during the qualities of whatever particular experience shows up. And if you can stay present, you navigate them pretty smoothly. Two challenges we face is, one, that our culture is not geared to see this level of non-judgment. Our culture is geared to establish things as good and bad. And our culture is just well established in this notion that if you kind of get enough power or money, you can keep things good and prevent bad. Some kind of silliness like that. So we have to challenge that. We have to challenge that notion that there's this magical place that you can just get to if you have enough money or wealth or whatever. And it's like, yeah, okay, great. Or enough power or enough special tech or whatever. So you have to challenge that. And so that's part of what the practice does in the context of kind of doing a similar, the 4 bells, right? The 4 bells is meant to establish a training ground that plants seeds, right? And those seeds grow into mindful warriors, right? So if you can kind of see that and practice that, then when you get hit with something that's not good, or that's something that's really challenging, and it's not only challenging in the context of what it feels like, but society also just flat out deems it bad. This bad. And so you've got your experience of it, and you've got the cultural influence that's coming with it. So it's very complex, it's very difficult. And you've got to stay present. And what you've got to stay present for is all the kind of the hiccuping of cultured training and cultured learning and shit from schools. This is bad, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. So you got to recognize that. So when they come up, you're like, I see you. Is it valuable? No. I see you. Is it valuable? Nope. I see you. Is it valuable? As a matter of fact, it is here. And so it's very much a skill. It's very much a skill to be navigating the energy of the sun and moon, lightness, darkness. It takes skill to kind of recognize the breath of heaven, which is essentially bringing in the best version of yourself, sharing the best version of yourself. The breath of earth. The breath of earth is everything else, right? It's all of it, all of the goodness in you, all of the darkness, all of it. That's the breath of earth. If you can, and it's got power to it. I mean, I hope I don't ever come across as saying that doubt, worry, fear, anger, rage, whatever is bad. It's not the case. They're just qualities that you can cultivate to certain ends, but they can't be relied upon as a foundation for relationships. That's just it's like you don't build a house on sand. You build a house on stable ground. So that's what that means. And then the ebb and flow of the tide. What that is simply a poetic expression of change itself. Like that's the constant. So when you take this into your day-to-day, how are you going to do it? How are you going to take this awareness into your day? I'm going to take it into my day, especially in the realm of thought. So what's really happening for me and is a lot of the things that I've thought to be pretty solid in a professional context have turned to be not solid. And the change has taken place very quickly, and it has been surprising in numerous ways. And I've had to really in the moment, right, when I was dealing with this change over the weekend, everything went fine. Um, but it's the feeling now of doubt, worry, fear, uncertainty that I'm really sitting with, and sitting with that. That's like what I meant by inviting change invites lightness and darkness to all holiday parties and birthdays. Is that um, I have to invite this uncertain feeling in, and there's no resolution currently. So because there's no resolution, there's just all this ambiguity, and feeling that on a regular basis and trying to assess that in a professional context. So if I can't rely on this structure, where do I shift? What do I do? How do I adapt? So that's how I'm taking it into the day. And I guess my ultimate intention is to be mindful, is to really just be mindful of this stuff going on, and that's the whole thing. To be mindful is to be focused in a non-judgmental way. And to be able to be focused in a non-judgmental way means that I'm willing to feel all this doubt, worry, fear, ambiguity. And the reason I'm willing to feel it is because I know there's resources inside. I know there's value, and like everything else, it's just going to change. Went deep today, Armor Down. Went a little bit over time, too. It's always a pleasure. Talk to y'all tomorrow. Oh, let's see if anybody's here. Oh, man, my chat function's